Why did the room go silent when the sergeant laughed? It happened in a place where laughter was supposed to be harmless. A mess hall on a Friday evening, plastic trays, the smell of overcooked food. Soldiers unwinding the way soldiers always did, loud, tired, careless. That was when his voice cut through everything. Sharp, casual, cruel. Military uniforms are just costumes for kids playing dress-up now, huh? 200 conversations died at once. Forks froze midair. Chairs stopped scraping the floor. Every head turned toward the serving counter, where a woman stood alone with a tray she hadn't yet picked up. She didn't look like she belonged here, and the room sensed blood. She was small, not weak, just unassuming. Her gray t-shirt clung to a frame that suggested discipline rather than softness, but no one noticed that yet. Her hair was tied back badly, like someone who hadn't bothered to look in a mirror before leaving. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded a napkin between her fingers. The sergeant stepped closer, feeding off the attention. He was built like a recruiting poster, broad shoulders, loud confidence, rank worn like armor. "Who authorized this little fashion show?" he said, smiling for the phones already rising. "This is a military base, not community theater." Laughter followed. It always did. Humiliation was a group sport when no one thought it mattered. She said nothing. She lowered her eyes. Her shoulders curled inward just enough to look ashamed. The room read her instantly, civilian, lost, prey. What they couldn't see was the way her breathing slowed, the way her feet adjusted by a few centimeters, the way her eyes cataloged exits without moving her head. She had learned long ago that silence could be armor. Someone challenged her, then another, drill commands, weapon handling, questions meant to trip her, to expose her. Each test was delivered with smug certainty, the kind that assumed victory before it began. She answered them all. Not loudly, not defiantly, just correctly. Perfect posture, flawless weapon disassembly, knowledge that went too deep, too clean, too practiced to belong to someone pretending. The laughter thinned. The phones wavered. Confusion crept in. But confusion doesn't stop cruelty. It sharpens it. The sergeant pushed harder, raised the stakes, demanded more. His pride wouldn't allow retreat, not now, not in front of everyone. When he ordered the search, the room shifted again. Not excitement this time, something colder, something uneasy. She nodded once. "If that's what you need," she said quietly. No anger, no pleading, just acceptance. And that was when the room made its final mistake. What kind of person agrees to humiliation without fear? As the jacket came off, the noise disappeared entirely. You could hear ventilation hum. Someone swallowed, someone else forgot to breathe. The shirt lifted slowly. Not rushed, not defiant. Revealed muscle first, not bulky, conditioned, earned, the kind of strength that doesn't advertise itself. Then ink. Black lines, precise, ancient. Two dragons, intertwined in perfect balance, spreading across her back like a warning written in a language only a few people alive could read. Recognition hit before sound did. A private whispered it without meaning to. That's the dragon balance." The sergeant didn't understand yet, but the colonel did. His spine straightened like instinct had taken over. His hand rose in a salute that came from 30 years of memory, not thought. "Lieutenant Victoria Brennan," he said, voice unsteady for the first time. "Call sign Ghost Dragon, Navy SEAL." The room collapsed inward. Phones hit the floor, faces drained of color. Laughter turned to horror as meaning rushed in all at once. Every perfect movement, every calm response, every moment she'd endured without resistance. She hadn't been weak. She had been patient. The sergeant sat down hard, like gravity finally found him. The power he'd wielded seconds ago evaporated, replaced by something small and afraid. She pulled the shirt back down, covered the tattoo, didn't raise her voice. My orders were to observe, she said, to listen, to see who people become when they think no one important is watching. No accusation, no speech. Just truth. And truth in that room was heavier than rank. When the lights went out minutes later, fear arrived for real. Emergency red washed the walls, doors sealed, phones lost signal. The hum of the bass changed pitch, the sound of systems locking down. This isn't about me anymore, she said calmly into the dark. Stay where you are. Someone asked what was happening. She didn't answer right away. Then footsteps echoed outside, too controlled, too deliberate. They're here for witnesses, she said, and for records. A rogue intelligence unit. Surveillance hidden inside security. A cancer that fed on weak leadership and unchallenged cruelty. She had been tracking them for months. Tonight they'd made their move. She moved through the darkness without sound, assigning roles to people who moments ago had mocked her. No judgment, no hesitation. Even the sergeant received a task. Redemption, she knew, wasn't loud either. The confrontation ended quickly, quietly, professionals meeting professionals in a space that had once echoed with laughter. By morning the base was secure, careers were not. The sergeant was escorted away, not in cuffs, but in silence, forced to sit with the weight of who he had been when he thought it didn't matter. Before she left, she stopped by the mess hall one last time. No uniform now, no rank visible. Just a woman walking past tables that wouldn't meet her eyes. A young private stood and thanked her, not for saving them, for showing him what strength actually looked like. She nodded once. Because dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need permission. Sometimes it waits. And then it acts. Why didn't she correct them when the first laugh hit? Victoria Brennan asked herself that question as the mess hall noise swelled again, not with humor this time, but with a nervous edge. The kind that came when certainty cracked but pride refused to bend. She could have ended it early. One word, one name, one quiet sentence spoken with authority, but authority revealed too soon teaches nothing. So she stayed silent. Inside, though, the silence was work. Her heart rate stayed low. 72 beats per minute, controlled, measured, the way it always was when pressure tried to claw its way in. She focused on breath first, slow in through the nose, long out through the mouth, then on posture. She let her shoulders round just enough to sell the lie. Let her hands tremble, a fraction exaggerated, the way fear was expected to look. Fear was easy to imitate. The harder part was swallowing the memory. The sergeant's voice carried again, louder now, sharpened by the faint discomfort spreading through the crowd. He didn't like that she hadn't broken, didn't like that his jokes had landed but failed to destroy. Men like him never noticed courage when it was quiet. They only noticed resistance. And she wasn't resisting. Not outwardly. She stared at the floor and saw something else entirely. Sand. Afghan dust swirling under rotor wash, a medic screaming for pressure, a hand slipping in blood no amount of training could make familiar. She remembered the first time she'd learned that humiliation and pain were tools, not enemies. That moment, years ago, had taught her something most soldiers never learned. Endurance wasn't passive. It was strategic. Orders, the sergeant scoffed again, packing now. From who? Victoria tightened her jaw, not in anger but restraint. Orders. The word echoed heavier than it should have. Orders were why she was here. Orders were why she'd shaved her identity down to something small and forgettable. Orders were why she'd spent 3 months being ignored, interrupted, talked over, dismissed. Orders were why she hadn't corrected a single person. Because this base wasn't just concrete and barbed wire, it was people. Patterns, habits, weaknesses. And tonight they were all on display. She answered when spoken to, nothing more, crisp, precise, no extra confidence, no apology. each response calibrated to give just enough competence to raise questions, but not enough to end the game. When they handed her the pistol, she felt the familiar weight settle into her palms like an old promise. Muscle memory surged before thought. She suppressed it slightly. Let the movements be clean but not flashy. Fast, but not boastful. Even then, she felt the shift. The room leaned forward. She sensed it without looking. The collective recalibration as minds scrambled to explain what they were seeing without abandoning the narrative they preferred. Civilian, pretender, joke. They clung to it. So she gave it back to them. She stepped away, eyes down, hands folded, the same posture she'd worn while being insulted. That was when the questions came faster. Ranges, procedures, scenarios. She answered them all. Not because she wanted to, but because the test demanded it. Every correct response tightened the room. The laughter died, phones lowered, smiles faltered. And still she didn't speak up. Why? Because competence alone didn't scare predators. Exposure did. When the colonel arrived, Victoria felt the weight of him immediately, not rank, experience. The way his eyes scanned before he spoke, the way his silence carried authority. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't kind, he was careful. She handed him the papers. Real, classified, designed to confuse anyone without the right clearance. The ambiguity was intentional. Confusion forced decisions. Decisions revealed character. She watched the sergeant from the corner of her eye as the colonel read, saw the first real crack appear. Uncertainty frightened him more than authority ever could. That was when he escalated. The M4. Victoria felt something tighten in her chest, not fear but disappointment. She had hoped he'd stop, hoped he'd choose restraint when given the chance. He didn't. She approached the table slowly, feeling the weight of memory rise with the weapon, not the training, the aftermath, the men who hadn't come home, the ones whose hands she'd held while the clock ran out. She shut it down. 8 seconds. 16 total. She stepped back. Silence roared. The colonel's eyes told her everything. He knew now, not who she was but what she was, and that knowledge unsettled him. Good. Then came the questions that weren't about skill. Motives, allegations, implications. Dangerous territory. She stayed calm, let them speculate, let the words civilian rot in their mouths. And when the sergeant ordered the search, something changed inside her. Not anger. Resolve. She'd known this might happen. New humiliation was often the final refuge of insecure power. Still, the weight of it pressed against old scars she rarely acknowledged. Moments from another life, another base, another room where silence had been demanded and compliance expected. She nodded anyway, because compliance in this case was a mirror. As the jacket slipped from her shoulders, she felt the room lean in again, but differently now. No laughter, no confidence, just hunger and dread tangled together. When the tattoo emerged, it was like watching a lie collapse in slow motion. She didn't turn around, didn't need to. She felt the recognition ripple outward, heard it in the way breath caught, in the way a single whispered word traveled faster than sound should have allowed. Dragon balance. She remembered earning it. The pain, the needle, the hours. The moment she'd looked in the mirror afterward and realized there was no going back, not because of the ink, but because of what it represented. Balance. Between violence and restraint, between obedience and conscience, between disappearing and standing tall. The colonel saluted. That was when she finally lifted her head. Not in triumph. In acknowledgement. After that, everything moved fast. Lights out, locks down, threats converging. She took command without raising her voice. Didn't need to. Authority, when real, didn't ask permission. As she moved through the dark, she felt the weight of every eye following her. The same people who'd laughed now waited for her instructions like oxygen. That wasn't power. That was responsibility. When the first confirmation came, hostiles inbound, communications compromised, she felt the old familiar cold settle in. The calm that always arrived right before things went wrong. She assigned tasks, made weapons from furniture, turned a mess hall into terrain. And when the sergeant asked how he could help, his voice stripped of arrogance and full of something raw, she saw the moment clearly. This was the real test. Not skill, not rank, but whether someone could change when faced with the truth of themselves. She gave him a chance. Because missions ended. People didn't. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the ink and the training and the classified layers of her life, Victoria Brennan still believed in redemption. Not loudly, not easily, but fiercely. And as the first footsteps echoed outside the sealed doors, she steadied her breath once more and prepared to pay whatever price the night demanded. Because dignity didn't shout, and strength didn't need applause. It only needed to hold. How did the room feel colder, even before the doors were breached? Victoria noticed it the moment the echo of footsteps aligned with the emergency lights. Not fear. Fear had a scent, sharp and electric. This was something else. Precision. The kind of silence that arrived when trained people moved with intent. She raised one hand, palm down. Stillness followed. It wasn't obedience born of rank. It was instinct. Every soldier in that room felt it, the invisible shift from uncertainty to structure. Chaos retreated when someone competent stepped forward. Even those who had mocked her earlier now watched her hands the way drowning people watched the surface of water. "Listen carefully," she said, voice low, steady, carrying just far enough. "No one here is the target. That's important to understand." A pause. "They're not here to intimidate you. They're here to erase." That word settled differently. It didn't provoke panic. It clarified reality. Victoria moved, barefoot silent across tile and concrete, her shadow bending with the red emergency lights. She positioned people without explaining why. Chairs angled, tables overturned not as cover but funnels. Fire extinguishers placed where panic hands could reach them. Trays stacked to deflect, not bullets, but fragmentation. Someone asked how she knew. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The sergeant, Callahan, hovered near the wall, jaw clenched so tight it trembled. He looked smaller now, stripped of the performance he'd built his identity around. When she passed him, he spoke under his breath. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," she said quietly, "but neither will we." That was the first time she said we. Outside, the footsteps stopped. Too suddenly. Victoria's pulse didn't spike, but something deep in her chest tightened. She knew that trick, silence before contact, the pause predators used to measure resistance. She tapped her wrist once. Internal systems synced. The tablet glowed briefly, showing outlines only she could read, movement patterns, heat signatures, blocked corridors. Someone inside the base was guiding them, someone who knew timing. She closed her eyes for half a second. So it had already reached this phase. 3 months of surveillance, 3 months of playing small, 3 months of letting people underestimate her while Shadow Protocol did the same. She opened her eyes. "Private Hudson," she said, not looking back. "Yes, ma'am." His voice shook, but he didn't hesitate. "On my signal, you'll relay exactly what I give you. No interpretation, no delay." "Yes, ma'am." She handed him a sequence. Letters, numbers, a phrase that meant nothing to him and everything to the people who would hear it. Tango 77, Echo Protocol, Ghost Dragon active. He swallowed, nodded. Victoria turned toward the doors. Her mind wasn't on the men outside. It was on a memory she hated. A different base, years earlier, A different commander who had laughed in a briefing room when she'd suggested an alternate route. She had been right. The convoy hadn't been. 6 dead, 2 captured. She had learned something that day. Power didn't just fail loudly. It failed quietly first. The lights flickered again. Then the first shot hit the door. Not to breach, to test. Victoria exhaled slowly. "Positions," she said. No shouting, no countdown. Everyone moved. The second shot came lower. Metal screamed. Someone whimpered before catching themselves. Victoria stepped onto a table without hesitation, not to be seen but to see. Her eyes traced angles, distances, the rhythm of impacts. The shooters weren't rushing. They were mapping reactions. Professional. She grabbed a tray, bent it slightly against a table edge, then slid it to Grant. "Hold it like this," she murmured. "Not flat, angle it." He nodded, surprised by how natural it felt to listen to her. A third impact. Then silence again. "Why are they waiting?" someone whispered. Victoria didn't answer immediately. She watched the tablet, watched a signal blink then disappear. "They're expecting us to break," she said finally, "or for someone inside to open a door." No one moved. That silence, voluntary, collective, was new, and it mattered. Callahan cleared his throat. "They won't get that from me." She met his eyes for the first time since the lights went out. Not judgment, assessment. "Good," she said, "then don't." The next sound wasn't a gunshot. It was a voice. Amplified, calm, familiar. "Victoria Brennan," it called through the sealed door. "This doesn't have to escalate." Her jaw tightened. That voice. She hadn't heard it in years, but she recognized the cadence immediately. Educated, polite, the kind of man who smiled while destroying lives and slept well afterward. Captain Drake. So Shadow Protocol had decided to speak. She stepped closer to the door, stopping just short of the breach line. "You always did talk too much," she said evenly. A pause. Then a soft laugh. "Still sharp, that's good. It means this will be efficient." She felt the room behind her hold its breath. "You're outnumbered," Drake continued, "and isolated. Whatever point you think you're making has already been documented. You've done your job. Now step away and let us clean up." Victoria closed her eyes. Just for a moment. Behind her eyelids flashed an image she hadn't allowed herself to dwell on all night. A woman who looked like her but moved differently. Same tattoo, same eyes, same refusal to yield. Her sister. "You're lying," Victoria said calmly. "If you were in control, you wouldn't be here." Silence. That was confirmation enough. Drake spoke again, slower now. "You always were difficult to predict." She smiled faintly. "That's why you're nervous." The door shook once, harder this time. Victoria raised her hand again. "Hudson," she said quietly. He inhaled. "Yes, ma'am." "Now." He spoke the phrase into the calm line, exactly as given. Nothing happened. For 3 long seconds, the room existed in suspended breath. Then her tablet chimed. Multiple new signatures, fast, coordinated. "Not hostile. Back up." Victoria's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Outside, Drake's voice sharpened. "What did you do?" She leaned closer to the door, her voice almost gentle. "I stopped pretending." The breach never came. Instead, the footsteps outside scattered, orders barked, confusion bled into precision. The hunters realized, too late, they were being watched. Victoria turned back to the room. Some people were shaking. Some were staring at her like she'd stepped out of a myth. Others looked inward, replaying every word they'd said to her earlier. She didn't address any of it. "Stay down," she said. "This isn't over yet." Because it was. Not the mission. Not the reckoning. and not the quiet transformation already taking root in the people who had seen what real strength looked like, when no one thought it mattered. Sometimes the battle wasn't outside the doors. Sometimes it had already happened, and the night was only beginning. Why did victory feel heavier than fear ever had? Victoria felt it as the echoes faded, boots retreating, radios barking over one another, a system recalibrating after near collapse. The mess hall still smelled of metal and sweat, the kind of air that clung to skin long after danger passed. People hadn't stood up yet. They were waiting. Waiting for permission. That realization pressed against her chest harder than any incoming threat had, because this wait wasn't tactical, it was human. She stepped down from the table slowly, deliberately, letting her boots touch the floor without ceremony. No speech, no signal that the moment was over. The room followed her movement instinctively, eyes tracking the way they had during contact. "Sit," she said quietly. Not as an order, as a mercy. Chairs scraped, knees bent, breath returned in uneven waves. Someone laughed once, thin and disbelieving, then clamped a hand over their mouth like they'd broken a rule. Victoria turned away. She didn't want to see gratitude yet. Gratitude complicated things. It softened edges that still needed to be sharp. Her tablet pulsed again, confirmation packets flooding in, command nodes locked down, external assets converging. The threat had retreated but not dissolved. That was never how it worked. You didn't kill a system by winning one night. You exposed it, let it bleed in the open. And bleeding systems lashed out. She moved toward the sink area, washing her hands even though they weren't dirty, a habit from another life. Cold water grounded her, anchored her in the present. She stared at her reflection, distorted by a hairline crack in the mirror. She looked tired, older than she'd felt an hour ago. "You okay?" a voice asked, tentative. She turned. It was the private who'd whispered earlier, the one who'd recognized the tattoo before the room understood what it meant. His name tag read Miller. He couldn't have been more than 22. His eyes were bright with something dangerous, admiration mixed with hunger. Victoria nodded once. "I will be." He hesitated. They didn't know, most of them. "I know," she said. That was the truth. Ignorance wasn't innocence, but it wasn't malice either. Most people followed whatever version of power made life easier. Few stopped to ask who got hurt in the process. She checked the time. Dawn was close. That mattered. The sergeant, Callahan, stood alone near the wall, hands clasped behind his back like he didn't trust them to behave. His face was gray, stripped of arrogance, lined with something close to grief. She approached him slowly. He didn't look at her at first. "I owe you an apology," he said. She studied him, not the rank, the man, the way his shoulders sagged, the way his voice lacked defense. "I know," she replied. That wasn't dismissal. It was acknowledgement. He swallowed. "I don't know if that's enough." "It isn't," she said calmly, "but it's a start." He nodded once, hard, like he just accepted a truth that would follow him for the rest of his career. "Why didn't you stop me?" he asked finally. "Back then when it started." Victoria didn't answer right away. Because the answer wasn't simple. "Because stopping you wouldn't have taught you anything," she said. "And because I needed to see who you were when no one important was watching." He flinched. "Am I salvageable?" he asked, quietly enough that only she could hear. She considered him for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "but not tonight." She walked away before he could respond. Redemption, she'd learned, wasn't something you handed to someone. It was something they had to build when no one was cheering. The base began to wake as the sky lightened. Sirens faded. Radios crackled with status updates. The night's secrecy peeled back layer by layer, revealing consequences that would echo for months. A secure room awaited her. Interrogators, reports, Long conversations where people pretended the truth was new to them. She didn't dread it. She dreaded the quiet afterward, because that was when memories came uninvited. They arrived as she waited alone, sitting on a metal chair beneath buzzing lights. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant. Her hands rested on her knees, steady, but her mind drifted backward. To a helicopter lifting off too late. To a voice on comms breaking mid-sentence. To the night her sister had disappeared. Everyone assumed KIA. Victoria never had. She had seen the patterns, the missing data, the way Shadow Protocol buried its mistakes under classification and silence. She had joined them not out of loyalty, but proximity. To get close enough to see the truth. Tonight had confirmed what she'd always suspected. Drake wasn't improvising. He was protecting something. Someone. A knock broke her from the memory. The colonel entered, posture stiff but eyes uncertain. "Command wants a full debrief," he said. "They're surprised." She almost smiled. "Good," she said. He hesitated. "There will be questions about how long you've been embedded." "There should be," she replied. "And about the tattoo," he added, then stopped himself, embarrassed. She met his gaze. "It's not a symbol of authority." "What is it then?" She considered the question. "Balance," she said finally, "between what you're ordered to do and what you can live with afterward." He nodded slowly, like someone hearing something they wished they'd learned sooner. When he left, the room felt smaller. Victoria closed her eyes again, just for a moment. She thought of her sister's laugh, sharp, unapologetic, the way she'd rolled her eyes at rules that didn't make sense. Hope was dangerous, but so was letting it die. Her tablet vibrated. One message, unmarked, encrypted beyond standard channels. "She's alive." 2 words. That was all. Victoria's breath caught, not violently but deeply, like air returning after years underwater. Her hands tightened, then relaxed. The mission hadn't ended. It had only shifted. She stood, shoulders squaring, not with adrenaline but purpose. Whatever waited next wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be clean. But it would be worth it. Because some battles weren't about survival. They were about truth. And as dawn finally broke over the base, Victoria Brennan walked toward the next phase of the war, not as a shadow, not as a spectacle, but as something far more dangerous. A woman who knew exactly why she was still standing. Sometimes strength didn't roar. Sometimes it waited. And then it chose. Why did the message feel heavier than the firefight ever had? Victoria stared at the screen longer than she should have. 2 words, no signature, no flourish, just a fact that rearranged the gravity of her entire life. She's alive. Hope surged first, sharp, dangerous, almost painful. Then training followed, tamping it down, forcing distance. Hope made people sloppy. Hope made them rush. She couldn't afford either. She locked the tablet and slipped it into her jacket, as if it hadn't just cracked her world open. Outside the secure room, the base was transitioning into its morning rhythm. Generators wound down. Radios shifted from emergency cadence to routine traffic. Soldiers moved with that particular fatigue that came after adrenaline drained away, when the body realized how close it had come to breaking. Victoria walked through it unnoticed. That, more than anything, confirmed the truth of the message. Shadow Protocol was already retracting, reframing the narrative, making sure last night looked like an anomaly instead of exposure. If they thought she was distracted now, they would move. Good. Distraction could be a weapon too. She entered the operations wing without stopping. Faces turned. Some nodded, some stared, some looked away, ashamed. She didn't slow for any of them. Respect earned through crisis was fragile. She didn't need it. What she needed was data. The operations officer on duty, A captain with tired eyes and a coffee he hadn't touched straightened when he saw her. "Ma'am, they said you might come this way." "They always say that," Victoria replied. He hesitated. "Command wants you grounded until debrief concludes." She met his gaze, calm, level, unthreatening. "Command can want many things," she said. "What they need is for me to have access." A beat passed. Then he slid his chair back. "You have 30 minutes. "Plenty," she said. The screens lit up as she moved. Traffic logs, secure transmissions, ghost networks layered beneath approved channels. She didn't need clearance codes. She had patterns, and patterns told stories. Her fingers moved faster than thought, muscle memory from years of hunting things that didn't want to be found. She wasn't searching for her sister directly. That would have been obvious, emotional, inefficient. She searched for absences, missing data, redacted movements, quiet transfers that didn't match mission tempo, names that appeared once, then never again. There, a logistics file disguised as medical evacuation support. No patient listed, no return manifest, routed through 3 intermediaries that didn't usually speak to one another. She leaned closer. The timestamp matched the day her sister vanished. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Control first, emotion later. She flagged the file, duplicated it into a private partition, then buried the access trail under legitimate command traffic. Sloppy work would get her noticed. She couldn't afford that, not now. When she stepped back, the captain was watching her with something close to awe. "You're not done, are you?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "I'm just getting honest." She left before he could ask more. In the corridor, she nearly collided with Callahan. He froze like a man unsure whether to salute or step aside. His face looked worse in daylight, dark circles, jaw clenched, a night's worth of self-awareness settling into bone. "I heard you were cleared," he said. "Temporarily," she replied. He hesitated, then spoke anyway. "They're going to make this complicated, spin it, protect themselves." "I know," she said. "And you," he asked, "what happens to you?" She stopped. That question, genuine, uncertain, felt heavier than rank ever had. "I keep moving," she said. He nodded slowly. If you ever need someone to own their mistake out loud." She raised a hand gently. "Do it without me." He looked confused. "Redemption doesn't work when someone else supervises it," she continued. "Do the work where no one can see it." He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." She didn't correct him. Not because she wanted the title. Because sometimes people needed structure before they could dismantle it. She walked out into the morning light. The sky was pale blue, scrubbed clean by wind that hadn't existed hours earlier. Birds circled the perimeter fence like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't nearly tipped sideways overnight. She breathed it in. Then her comm buzzed again. Different channel, older encryption, the kind that hadn't been used in years. Her thumb hovered for half a second. Then she answered. "Vic," a voice said softly. Her breath caught. It wasn't fear, it wasn't shock. It was recognition. "Don't say my name like that," Victoria replied, voice steady through sheer force of will. A faint laugh on the other end, familiar, infuriating, alive, still bossy. Victoria closed her eyes. "You're not dead," she said. "No," her sister replied, "but I was close more than once." Silence stretched between them, dense with things unsaid, years compressed into breath. "They told me you were compromised," Victoria said, "that you defected." "They told you what they needed you to believe," her sister answered, "just like they told me you turned into one of them." Victoria felt the old ache stir, the distance, the doubt, the choices neither of them could explain without reopening wounds. "Where are you?" she asked. "I can't tell you yet," her sister said, But I can tell you this, they're moving assets, cleaning house. Last night scared them. Good, Victoria said. They're going to come for you. I know. A pause. That tattoo, her sister said softly. You finally earned it. Victoria almost smiled. You always said I would. I always knew you would, her sister replied. That's why I survived. The line crackled. Listen carefully, her sister continued. There's a window, 72 hours. After that, they burn everything, including me. Victoria's jaw tightened. Then we don't let them, she said. I was hoping you'd say that. The calm cut. Victoria stood still for a long moment, the base moving around her like a river around stone. Soldiers passed. Vehicles started. Orders were given. No one noticed the woman standing at the center of it all, recalibrating her life. 72 hours. No backup she could trust. No official channels. Just truth, momentum, and the quiet resolve that had carried her through every moment of underestimation. She turned back toward the base, not toward command, but away from it, toward the places no one watched closely anymore. Toward the edges. Because systems focused on control always forgot the margins. And that was where she had learned to survive. As she walked, she rolled her sleeve slightly, just enough for the edge of the dragon ink to peek through. Not as a warning, as a reminder. Balance. Between loyalty and justice, between family and duty, between silence and action. The night had exposed who she was. The days ahead would demand she decide what she was willing to become. Sometimes, resilience wasn't about enduring pain. Sometimes it was about choosing to step back into it, eyes open, heart steady, purpose clear. And Victoria Brennan had never been afraid of hard choices. Only meaningless ones. The clock had started, and she was already moving. Why did the last step feel quieter than the first betrayal? Victoria had always imagined the end would be loud. Sirens, gunfire, names shouted across radios, some visible reckoning that told the world a line had been crossed and justice had arrived to correct it. That was how stories liked to end. Clean, understandable. This wasn't that. This was a hallway with peeling paint and flickering lights. This was a borrowed badge and a clock ticking somewhere she couldn't see. This was 72 hours reduced to a handful of moments where every decision mattered more than the one before it. She moved through the margins of the base as she always had, places people forgot to watch because they assumed nothing important happened there. Storage corridors, maintenance access points, the human blind spots built into every system that trusted itself too much. Her sister's last transmission replayed in her mind, not as sound, but as weight. 72 hours. Victoria didn't rush. Rushing was how you made mistakes. Instead, she layered time. Let minutes do work for her. Let people underestimate silence. She reached the auxiliary comms hub just as the sun dipped low enough to stain the concrete orange. No guards, no cameras active. Someone had already decided this place didn't matter anymore. They were wrong. She bypassed the lock with a motion that felt almost gentle. Inside, the air smelled stale, like abandonment. Screens hummed softly, old but functional. This was where fragments went to die. Half-forgotten data, archived channels, things no one wanted to explain. She woke them all. Information flooded in, not raw intel but context, transfers that didn't line up, promotions that followed failures, medals pinned to chests that had never been in the field. And there, buried beneath 7 layers of plausible deniability, shadow protocol's real purpose. It hadn't been about intelligence. It had been about control. Manufacturing threats, redirecting blame, silencing inconvenient witnesses not with bullets but with narratives. People didn't disappear. They were redefined until no one believed them anymore. including her sister. Victoria's hand stilled. For the first time since the message, the anger surfaced, not explosive, focused, cold enough to cut. She packaged everything carefully, not as an accusation, but as a mirror, letting the system see itself without commentary. Truth was more dangerous when it spoke for itself. She set the release conditions. Multiple redundancies, independent channels, civilian oversight nodes, people who would ask questions because they didn't owe anyone silence. She could already hear the objections forming in distant offices, the scrambling, the sudden urgency of men who had mistaken permanence for immunity. Before she executed, she paused. This was the moment. After this, there would be no shadows to hide in, no anonymity, no pretending the cost belonged only to others. Her calm vibrated once. "You in position?" her sister asked. "Yes." A breath on the other end. "Once you do this, you won't be able to protect me." Victoria closed her eyes. "I know. And you're still going to." "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "Good," her sister said quietly. "I didn't survive all this so you could become them." Victoria smiled, small, private, proud. "I'll see you on the other side," she said. The transmission ended. Victoria pressed execute. Nothing exploded. No alarm sounded. The world didn't tilt. That was the strangest part. The release moved like a whisper. Files unlocked themselves. Emails queued. Calls routed to people who didn't expect them. The truth slid into places it had never been allowed to exist before. And then, inevitably, responses began. Orders countermanded. Access revoked. Emergency meetings convened by people pretending this was all very sudden. Victoria shut the screens down and stepped back into the hallway. She didn't run. She walked. By the time they realized where the breach had come from, she was already gone. The extraction wasn't cinematic. No helicopter silhouetted against the sky. Just a civilian vehicle and a driver who didn't ask questions. The kind of help that appeared when you'd earned it by never abusing it. As the base shrank behind her, Victoria felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Relief. Not because it was over, but because it was finally honest. They met at a place that didn't matter to anyone else. A stretch of coastline with broken fencing and wind that smelled like salt and rust. Her sister stood near the water, hair longer, posture looser, but eyes exactly the same. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Victoria stepped forward. They didn't hug immediately. Too much history for that. Too many years where survival had required distance. "You look different," her sister said. "So do you." A beat. "You were right," her sister added, "about all of it." Victoria shook her head. "I was stubborn." "That too." They laughed softly, cautiously, like people relearning something fragile. Behind them, the world was already reacting. Headlines forming, careers unraveling. Institutions insisting this had been an isolated failure rather than a reflection. It didn't matter. Truth didn't need consensus. "I won't be able to stay," her sister said. "Not for a while." "I know. But this time," her sister continued, "I won't disappear." Victoria nodded. That was enough. As night settled in, they sat side by side, watching waves crash against metal that had long ago lost its purpose. Victoria rolled her sleeve up fully, the dragon tattoo catching moonlight. "Balance." Her sister traced the air near it, not touching. "You earned it the hard way." Victoria watched the horizon. There isn't an easy way. They stayed until the wind turned cold. When they finally parted, it wasn't with promises. It was with understanding, the kind that didn't need constant reassurance. Victoria walked alone down the beach, boots sinking slightly into wet sand. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't on a mission. Not really. She was simply moving forward. She thought of the mess hall, the laughter, the silence that followed, how easily power revealed itself when it thought no one important was watching. She thought of the sergeant, of the private, of every quiet moment where a choice had been offered without ceremony. Strength, she realized, wasn't proven in grand gestures. It was proven in restraint, in patience, in the refusal to become smaller or crueler just to survive. Somewhere behind her, waves erased her footprints. Ahead, there was no clear path. And that was fine, because dignity didn't demand recognition. It didn't announce itself with rank or ink or violence. Sometimes dignity simply acted. And then it walked away, leaving the world to decide what to do with the truth it had been given.